Hey, in this video, I'm going to show you how to work a decorative bind-off that looks beautiful on hand-knit shawls. It has a pointed edge with small eyelet holes. Let me show you how it's done. I have a swatch with 15 stitches. This bind-off edge needs a multiple of 5. To begin, we're going to bind off the first 2 stitches. So knit 1, knit 2, pass the first over, that's bind off 1, knit another stitch, bind off 2. Now how we get that pointed little edge, we're going to move the stitch on the right hand needle back to the left hand needle, and then with your working yarn using the backwards loop method, cast on 1 stitch. So now we have 1 extra stitch. Now we're going to bind off 4 stitches. So knit the first stitch you just cast on, knit the second stitch, pass the first stitch over, that's bind off 1, knit 1, slip, that's bind off 2, knit 1, pass the stitch, that's bind off 3, knit 1, pass the stitch, that's bind off 4. So we just made the first bump. Let's do it again. We move the stitch from the right hand needle to the left. Using the backwards loop method, cast on 1 stitch. Now we're going to bind off 4. So knit 1, knit 2, pass the stitch over, knit 1, pass the stitch over, that's bind off stitch 2, knit 1, pass the stitch over, that's bind off 3, knit 1, pass the stitch over, that's bind off 4. So here we are. There is your second bump or point. Let's do it one more time. So the stitch on the right hand needle moves to the left. With the backwards loop method, you cast on 1 stitch, 1 stitch. Now we're going to knit the first stitch on the needle, knit the second, and bind off 4. 1, knit, bind off 2, knit, bind off 3, knit, bind off 4. We have enough stitches to do it one more time, so let's go through it again. You move the stitch from the right needle to the left, backwards loop method, cast on 1 stitch. Then we're going to knit the stitch, just cast on, knit the next. We'll pass that first stitch over, that's bind off 1, bind off 2, bind off 3, and bind off 4. You have 1 stitch left. You can snip your yarn and tie a knot, and your bind off is complete. You've got bumps all the way across. And the thing that's really going to make this shine is blocking. So let me show you how I block the edge. It's pretty easy. You just grab pins, find your eyelet hole, and tug a little. When you do this, your yarn will be damp from blocking, so it'll be pretty easy to move and find those holes. Just pop a pin in each one and get a nice point. And that's how you do a decorative bind off.